This video was sponsored by Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to join with the link in the description will get 2 free months on their premium membership. Today, we are going to talk about travel. Before all of this happened, chances are we used Airbnb to find a place to stay, and we discovered that some of those options were great and others, well, not so much. But regardless of personal experiences, one thing is certain. Airbnb revolutionized how we travel. And not only that, Airbnb, along with similar platforms, shook up local economies and the real estate market. People listed anything and everything from small, cramped rooms to luxury homes. So Airbnb's social impact is bigger than most people think. Airbnb itself is no stranger to controversy. The past years have brought criticism and backlash from local and national governments alike. This latest crisis has only aided in putting the company to the test. Layoffs, controversial refunds, and a shaky IPO, Airbnb is going through turbulent times. Will it come out on top? Let's talk about it in this episode of Company Forensics. An air mattress in the middle of a living room. Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky shared an apartment in San Francisco and needed some extra cash to pay rent. They noticed their living room was empty, so they jazzed it up, put on an air mattress in the middle, and offered breakfast. It was, in their own words, a bed and breakfast. And it worked. The first guests paid $80 a night. Hey, San Francisco's pretty expensive. Along with Nathan Blakarski as CTO, they launched airbedandbreakfast.com in 2008. It offered short-term stays to those who couldn't find hotel rooms in crowded cities like San Francisco and New York. To help promote the platform, they even turned to politics and cereal, but it failed to catch on. Even when they reached what seemed to be the final version, interest was still lackluster. And it was a good idea. Find a place and make a reservation in only 3 clicks. It sounds great, right? Well, investors weren't convinced. In fact, 15 investors passed on the idea. I wonder how they feel now. But then there was one guy who did, and that's Paul Graham from the Y Combinator program. He decided to take them under his wing, providing cash and training in exchange for a slice of air bed and breakfast. So the founders used these new funds, around $20,000, to fly to New York City to stay with hosts and write detailed reviews and even take professional photographs to help them with advertising. Then there was the name. Air bed and breakfast just didn't sound right, so they changed it to Airbnb, which really marked a new era. A chaotic one at that, because people started noticing Airbnb, and most importantly, they started using it. In fact, 2009 was so chaotic that Chesky moved out of his place because it worked both as an office and as a rental place. They reached 10,000 users and 2,500 listings, and such numbers finally drew the attention of investors. In April of that year, Y Investors and Sequoia Capital invested $615,000. The pitch deck they used to raise that money is actually our most used template on Slidebean. You can go to slidebean.com/YouTube to use the actual slides that these guys used to raise money, with some nice redesign by our team. After this, the platform only kept growing, and by 2010, Airbnb reached more than 700,000 bookings, 80% of which came after the investment. With such success, and only then, did investors really say, hey, Airbnb might be worth a shot. So for their second round of funding, Airbnb raised $7.2 million, which already valuated the company at $70 million. Not bad, given that they started in 2008. Airbnb says, hello world. 2010 was a good year. Airbnb won awards, opened their first international office in London, and reached 10 million nights booked. They secured more than $112 million in funding, and the operations had grown so massive, other international offices followed in places like Barcelona, Milan, Paris, and Sao Paulo. In 2013 alone, the number of listings increased to 250,000. Airbnb was all over the world. In fact, it even became one of the first US-based companies to operate in Cuba after the Obama administration eased restrictions on the Caribbean country. By 2015, the company had garnered serious funding. In its Series E1 round, investors shelled out $1.6 billion against a valuation of $25 billion. Aided by such funds, it started absorbing the competition. They acquired rivals Accolio and Crashpatter in Europe and bought companies that worked at hyperlocal levels with valuable data such as mapping and restaurant guides. This way, Airbnb was consolidating itself as one of the main choices for short-term rental. But it's not all a fairy tale, because there's an unavoidable phenomenon that comes with having hundreds of thousands of guests and hosts. Complaints began pouring in. Trashed apartments, theft, racism, some guests were held at gunpoint, and even prostitution prostitution. So in order to deal with these issues, which go back as far as 2012, Airbnb implemented actions such as host guarantee funds, change in policies, and they went as far as redesigning the entire image to garner a feeling of belonging anywhere. But prostitution and theft weren't the biggest issues. The challenge was the cities themselves. All over the world, local and national governments applied more stringent measures against temporary rentals. Take New York, for example. It's one of the biggest Airbnb destinations, but still the local government threatened to shut down the platform. Even San Francisco, where Airbnb was born, saw a citizen initiative to limit the platform. And the problem doesn't extend to the US alone. Citizens in Barcelona and Paris have openly spoken against the platform. And the reason is quite clear. Aiming at tourism, hosts have spiked prices up in a matter of a few years and have made entire cities completely unaffordable for locals, especially for the middle class. It has become a source of income and jobs, both direct and indirect. And though the company was growing, there were some ups and downs. The famed IPO. You can find Airbnb anywhere, maybe not in North Korea, but anywhere else. Q3 of 2019 saw double the losses of 2018, with a considerable increase in marketing of about 60% more than 2018. And this wasn't good because it had long been known that Airbnb planned to launch an IPO in 2020. Chesky, however, assured everybody that the company was profitable. Many companies have gone public while not having profit, Uber and Lyft and Twitter. But here's an interesting nugget of information. Recent years have seen the highest number of IPOs from companies that aren't profitable since when? Take a guess? Well, that's right, since 2000, right before the dot-com bubble burst. It's just a fun fact. Chesky was pretty evasive about the whole thing. This is what he said in an interview with CNBC when asked about funding and the IPO. "We don't need to raise money, and so we haven't been in a rush to go public." All he did was hype about 2020 and the climatic opening. But that IPO, along with everything else, had to be put on hold. The now and the future. So we all know what has happened in the past few months. 80% of lodging reservations around the world have been canceled. The WTO predicts that tourism will drop in a conservative scenario about 60% all over the world, if not worse. Most Airbnb markets saw reservations drop 90%. Some hosts had all reservations from April, May, and June canceled. So what has Airbnb done to deal with this situation? First, it has come to grips with reality. Its valuation, formerly at $36 billion, have been lowered internally to around half. Chesky announced that revenue is expected to be $800 million less than last year. The company managed to raise 2 rounds of funding, each at an estimated $1 billion, in the middle of a crisis. Where would this money go? Part of it, $250 million to be precise, will go to a fund for hosts. This sounds like a lot of money, but it's only to cover a percentage of cancellations. As far as the IPO, there are no signs of that happening anytime soon, and experts agree it would be the wrong time to go public. Then come the layoffs, and that's by mid-May when we're shooting this video. Airbnb fired 1,900 employees, 25% of its staff. The decision did not come easy for Chesky, who took the high road in the eyes of many. In his letter to those affected and the rest of the company, he was very clear. This wasn't the employees' fault. This was beyond what many could comprehend. So those affected will receive 14 weeks pay plus 1 more week for each year with the company. As for high executives, they have reduced their salary in 50%, and Chesky will not receive his salary for the next 6 months. When it comes to reservations, now that's where it gets tricky. Airbnb sent out communications detailing the refund process, which was conditioned between dates. The process seemed easy, but many guests saw it's actually very difficult. Hosts come up with excuses and conditions that are impossible to fulfill. This leads us to the hosts themselves. Big and small, they've seen a complete halt in their income, and many of them have said that the policies around this crisis haven't been geared towards their benefit, as the refunds did not consider them at all. Backlash was such, Chesky had to take it to social networks to issue an apology and take more actions, which included this $250 million fund. But these are actions that cannot compensate for the financial impact this crisis has generated, and in fact, it could reshape the way we see temporary rentals and cities themselves. Remember, all these locals affected by rising house costs? Well, some experts believe that they are key to the future of housing, as empty apartments geared towards tourism tourism might become normal apartments again. Though Chesky has stated repeatedly that travel will return and that it will be different, to him, local and hyperlocal reservations will be the norm at first, and Airbnb will be there with newer, stricter cleaning policies. The WTO, World Tourism Organization, partially agrees with him as it estimates that travel will eventually bounce back by the end of the year as borders gradually open. But this might not be enough. Airbnb has had a lot against it. It has had to funnel a lot of its investment to cover costs, governments resist its presence, and the future of travel is still up in the air. So eventually might never come. Will another platform replace Airbnb? Perhaps. So you should start decluttering your living room. Now, we get tons of questions around the tools that we use to make these videos. Well, the background animation is done in Adobe After Effects. I found a great course by Jake Bartlett that goes over all the details on Skillshare, and I'm happy to recommend it. Skillshare agreed to give us 1,000 codes to get 2 free months on the platform, which you can access from the link in the description. Another course I can recommend is Caleb Babcock's iPhone Filmmaking. It's a quick 30-minute class on Skillshare on creating cinematic video with just your iPhone. Thanks a lot for watching this video. Make sure that you subscribe to stay in touch with our company forensics videos, which we launch once a week. More importantly, we do a Q&A after each video, a live Q&A with myself and the rest of the team. So make sure you join our Startup Cafe on Discord to be part of that. See you next week.